While in Canberra, the Digital Farm TV called on newly re-elected National Farmers Federation Chief Jock Laurie, who has warned industry that major farm policy challenges lie ahead in 2012. During the next 3 weeks, we'll share our conversation with the NFF President and his grounded farm gate analysis of water policy, the new carbon tax and coal seam gas regulation. This week, Jock Laurie told us that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority draft plan and recommended water cuts were all about politics.
What's happened in the last 18 months with rainfall in Australia is a great example of the Australian climate. It's something that we've been dealing with for a long time. I mean, we've all got the photos of the old chuck wagons in the middle of the rivers down south when they were dry, you know, in the early part of the century. So it's not something new, but I think people tend to forget it. And when you've got a flow going out the bottom end of the river system, you've got another one down through the middle of New South Wales and one coming in out of Queensland, 3 flood events all in the one time. It just shows what an extraordinary climate Australia has now. Hopefully that'll allow common sense policy to be developed on a lot of water issues. So I think that's very important, and I think it's a good thing to see rain around again after 10 years of drought too, I can tell you. So I think Craig Knowles and the Minister have genuinely tried to engage the communities. I think they're dealing with a very difficult issue, obviously a very difficult political issue, and they've really tried to engage all the stakeholders in getting to a sensible outcome. But in the end, I think the Minister's got to make a decision. They've come up with something that they think is saleable amongst the environmental groups and the farmers and rural communities. And I think you're seeing a lot of objections from all of those groups right at the moment about the plan. And you know, in our case, that's more about taking water out of productive use, and that's one of the major issues and major concerns that we have about the whole thing. Always have had it, and will continue to have. So, very difficult to score it, but I think in a position where the Minister's got a job to do, they've tried to find an outcome. They're trying to find a political centre ground, I suppose, that they think they can move forward on. This is all about a political outcome. It's about finding an area where they can actually get a piece of legislation go through, and I think if you really sit down and analyse the document, I think there's not a lot of clarity in the detail that I think our members certainly would like to see, and I think certainly the irrigation community would like to see, about how they're going to get the water and how they're actually going to deliver the water into the environmental assets, how they're going to properly assess those assets, the actual impact, socio-economic impact it's going to have on communities. How they're going to address that, what sort of water savings that are actually going to be made through infrastructure spend, and what that infrastructure spend is going to be. So that detail is not there at the moment.
Jock Laurie said the NFF had conducted a searching review of the socio-economic impact analysis contained in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority draft recommendations.
I think we've had a lot of people here sit down and have a look at that stuff, and I think you need to have followed the whole the progression of the thing to really understand how it's going. I don't think there's any doubt that we've still got major concerns about an understanding about the reduction of water out of those systems, and there has already been quite a bit of water taken out. There are people now that are selling water assets because they're sort of stranded and the cost or efficiency of those water assets aren't viable anymore. So in many cases I think those things haven't been taken into consideration. I think it's very hard to understand exactly what the impact is going to be on those communities. I think longer term you'll see the impact and you'll see the reductions as we did with the drought. And I mean that was a position where it was forced on by weather circumstances, but there were very obvious changes in those communities. If you were to reduce 30 or 40% of water out of those valleys, then you will have a permanent change in those communities, and I think time will tell just exactly what that impact will be. Yeah, well, I think there's the whole water reform debate, and it all depends where you come from on this one. There's valleys that have already been through a reform process and have done a lot of work, so they feel that they've done their share. There are other valleys, and the 4 valleys that are there at the moment, that people are very concerned about where the bulk of the water is going to come out of now, and they feel very, I think, exposed because they're 4 valleys when all the other areas, it hasn't been put across all the other areas. So it all depends where you come from as to what the argument is, and it certainly varies between valleys. I can tell you very much on the work that's been done, the work that should have been done, or the work that will be done, and I think it's getting to the stage where quite a few valleys are looking at themselves in isolation now and just trying to see what the impact to themselves is, and making a judgment on what's been presented by that.
Jock Laurie told the Digital Farm TV that in the countdown to Christmas this year, despite 100% water allocations, all irrigators were feeling threatened by proposed changes to their lives and livelihoods.
Well, look, I think they're all feeling threatened. It's the uncertainty that's causing the problem. The document that's been released basically says that there will be voluntary buyback. So if people don't want to sell their water, then obviously they're not going to be impacted by it. There will be infrastructure spend there, so there'll be money spent in those communities which will provide some employment opportunities back and through those areas. And there's been commitments given, publicly by the government there'd be no compulsory acquisition. So in many cases, I think the individual farmers need to sit down and have a look and understand that they're not being forced to sell water. Water's not going to be compulsory acquired off them. It'll be a personal decision. And obviously they'll make those decisions in relation to their community and how it's going to affect their families personally. So I'd say to everyone just to sit down and have a good look at the document, get an understanding about how it's going to affect you, and I suppose make decisions based on what you think is in the best interest of yourself and your local communities.
Next week, the NFF president tells us that while the new federal carbon tax poses a cost threat to food and fibre producers, the federal government's planned carbon farming initiative could open up new streams of enterprise for producers.